Beauty from the Shelf is a podcast where industry experts fill in the gaps integral to growth for early-stage beauty founders and brands. For today's episode, I'm joined by Kristen Evans, and we talk all things consumer research. Check out a snippet from our conversation.
So there was no win for the category, no win for the brand. All there was an uptick of confusion, which was manifested in a seemingly positive metric of women spending more time in the aisle. And so qualitative and quantitative, they complement each other. They are not opposites of each other. Too often we try to make them like they're opposing information sets. They are two sides of the same coin that help round out and fill out the story.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Kristen. Kristen is a 15-year veteran in the space of market research, marketing, and brand building. She has worked across a number of industries, starting with sports and moving into the CPG space, and she's also worked on the agency side as well. She's also a David Ogilvy Award winner, slight flex, and she's done some really exciting work with CoverGirl and their Give Back campaign many years ago, and is a TEDx speaker. You all are truly in for a treat as you hear what Kristen has to offer us in terms of consumer insights. Let's get into the episode after I say thank you to our sponsor. The Emerson Group is a sponsor for the Beauty for the Shelf podcast. I'd like to thank them for their continual support in allowing us to continue to spread the knowledge to give early stage brands access to the tips and tools to help them grow. Now that we thanked our sponsor, let's go ahead and get into the episode. Kristen, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I am so excited to have you on here to talk consumer research. I know that it is a personal passion of yours and also something that you are well versed at based on your background and your profession. And just for those who are listening, I know that some of our listeners are new to the CPG industry, but I would definitely say consumer research is an integral part of many CPG businesses. Hopefully all CPG businesses, but definitely, many or most. But I do also know that it can be a lot harder for small brands to access some of this consumer research due to funding. Like funding research projects can be really tough. I also know that there are some key pieces that are integral to present when you are pulling together consumer research or trying to figure things out. And so I'd love to just start off this conversation by saying, as these brands scale, is there a point when you think they should be setting aside funds for research? And if so, when should this happen? Are you like, it should happen at the jump? Are you like, if you don't have the money, this is what you can at least do? Share with us.
Yes. So the first thing I want to say is that consumer research should not be contingent upon if you have a budget. Too often we make research a cost center of our businesses, if you will, as opposed to understanding that it is actually a revenue driver. And so I start there because there are alternatives to doing large scale research. Traditionally, we think about doing research, we are thinking about those large scale quantitative studies. And sometimes we're thinking about product use studies, and those do cost a lot of money. But there are things that you can do prior to reaching that stage, although I do believe that those things are important, and I'll get to them in a second, even for emerging beauty businesses. But to answer your question, I say specifically, you should be doing it from the beginning. You need to have a researcher's mindset as you approach your business, because unless you and your friends and family plan on being the only humans ever buying this product, at some point you need feedback from real people. And so when you create a mindset as a researcher that's saying, I am using every opportunity to observe, to listen, to get feedback, you are now entering being your product development researcher. That is now the role and hat that you are taking on. And that can start with conversation. We too often dismiss the value of conversation as the gateway to gaining insights and research and data. You don't need a survey monkey, although you can. That is a low cost method of getting feedback. But if I were to bring you a lip balm right now and ask you, Monique, what do you think of this packaging? How easy was it to apply? What do you like about it or not like about it? What would you do differently about it? If you were to tell someone else about this product, how would you describe it in your words? All of that is data collection. And so from the beginning, you should be gaining that information. So I think part of it is we have to reframe what we feel like research is and how we are gathering it. On the scale spectrum, though, for these companies that are really trying to cross the threshold of brick and mortar, when you are trying to get into a marketplace, something like an Amazon or like Black and Green Marketplace online, you need research. Let me just make it real plain and simple. You need research. You need data. You need facts. You need believability. You need purpose for these entities to stock your product because no one is giving you shelf space, be it physical or virtual, just because your packaging is cute. And if it is cute, that's actually a data point that it's going to drive traffic and that somebody wants to pick it up off the shelf for the turn rate. But with that said, going into these pitch meetings, and everything is a pitch in one way or another, when you're sitting before the buyer, you need data that helps them understand that you have a product that somebody wants to buy, that you have a product that will boost category sales, that you have a product that meets a consumer need. And how big is that need? How valuable is that need? You need to quantify that in terms of market share and dollar value. So you can't just go in there and say, oh, I have something I believe in. It's great that you believe in it. But when you get to a point when you are trying to sell it in to other people, you need a reason for them to believe. And that comes on the basis and the foundation of research. I would also say when you are in product development mode, especially, founders, at some point, we cannot just keep making the product because you like it. If you are the catalyst for believing that there is a need, that is wonderful. You now need to magnify that need. You need to have a reason to understand that it's beyond just you. That should even be the reason that you inquire more about wanting to create a product that services a need. And that is how you really should be creating a product master plan, a product roadmap that says, I'm going to introduce this and then I'm going to introduce that. It should not simply be because it's what you want to go off and make. That kind of turns you a little bit into a mad scientist. And it can be fun that you just want to go off and make these products. But if you want to release them into the world, you need to have magnified the problem. And then you need to understand which features matter. That's where a lot of developers get messed up, is they want it to be features that they want. But every feature that you want is not a feature that matters to the consumer. Some of them are point of parity. If you want to point a difference and you want to hang your hat on something, you better make sure it's the thing that the consumer cares about. All that to say, there are a lot of critical and pivotal points in the process, whether it's on the back end of just product development, product evolution, or if it's on the front end where you're trying to sell your products in, that you really need to be leveraging research, which is why I go back to saying you should be doing it from the beginning and you should be doing it continuously. Your research doesn't stop because your product is launched.
What great perspective that you just offered to us and just letting us know, number one, research does not have to be this formal thing, but research is really just collecting information and you can consistently do that. And also, hey, by the way, if you have the mindset of a researcher, you can leverage these things that you're doing to get the information. I'm sure that that's really helpful to someone. Also, at the end there, you kind of talked about a point of parity versus a point of difference. I don't know if everyone might know quite what you mean there. I was wondering if you could expand on that because I thought, oh, that's a word right there. But can you just expand on that for the audience?
Absolutely. So in every category, in every subcategory, there are things that you just need to have. They are not the things that are game changers. They are not necessarily the things that put you above a competitor, but they're actually the things that make you line up with the competitor. So at this point, for example, if we were to use something like a facial cleanser, saying that you cleanse the face, it's an expectation, it's a point of parity. Like, you shouldn't be here if that's not what you do. You're in the wrong category. And I bring that up because there are some who will lead with that. And it's like, okay, that's your point of parity. That is there's a term that we use also, table stakes. And we borrowed that term from poker, right? And table stakes means that you just have enough to sit at the table. It's enough to buy into the game. But your point of difference, those are the things that after you have matched and met the base expectations of what a product in this category should be doing, your points of difference are really the places where you can have advantage over the competition, where you can set a new bar for the category. It's those things that you do uniquely better, or it's those things that are not present in a competitive set. It's the thing that is innovative or breakthrough or just sometimes better than the competition. Those are the things that are going to set you apart. Those are your points of difference. And again, your points of parity, those are standards and expectations that have been set by the category. They have been set by the consumer, and you should just be meeting those at a quality level. You need both. At the end of the day, when you write your checklist, what are my points of parity? What are my points of differences? You're not going to win on just having parity alone.
That's so good. I feel like I talk to so many brands that will say, oh, but we're clean. And yes. I have started to say being clean has become table stakes. Even when I think about the fact that MOCRA is being enacted, right? This kind of, hey, we're going to have some regulations now around cosmetics ingredients here in the US. They're essentially saying, here is the point of parity, the minimum that all brands must meet. And while that wasn't necessarily very present here in the US before, it certainly is becoming a raised bar, if you will, for all brands who want to participate in the category. So thank you for giving me some new terminology around that, because I feel like I've been saying that, but now I don't have to just use my poker reference. I can now use this point of parity.
Yes.
So going back to research, the engineer in me is like, hey, I know that there's, at least from a baseline perspective, qualitative research and quantitative research. And I feel like in your first answer, in terms of how or when should brands, set aside funds for research, you shared that, hey, you can get research without paying a lot of money for it. And I said, oh, well, that's like qualitative research, or a lot of that is. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about qualitative research versus quantitative, and how, an early stage brand with minimal funding, you might have already talked about the qualitative, but how they can kind of use these to help them with the different things that they might be pulling together.
Absolutely. So quantitative, I'm going to go to the root word in each one first, and it's going to sound like duh, but I think that it's really important. So quantitative research, root word being quant, it is something that you can calculate. And that is what I often call the what. You are measuring what people are doing. You can quantify it. This becomes really valuable when we are looking at projections, when you are trying to project how likely your audience is to be receptive to your product. And we translate that into a sales projection. We translate that into a order quantity projection, right? So it's important that says, hey, I'm putting a whole lot of money into this thing. Is there enough people that are going to buy it? Are there enough people that are going to be interested in it? Are there enough people who got the result that I claim that I deliver? Right? That's the way we think about quantitative research. Qualitative research is really what I call the why. So quantitative tells you what people are doing. Qualitative tells you why they're doing it. There's a quality measure to it. There is texture and color to it where you are not just seeing me contouring and then we identify that contouring is a trend. But qualitative will tell you, well, why are they contouring? Because that why could be the catalyst for you creating a product that enables that. And that's actually something I worked on in the past where we understood contouring used to happen across about 16 different products. But then it was like, wait, well, can we create products that enable contouring because the culture is already doing it, right? And so qualitative allows you to get context. It allows you to get quality of information. It allows for you to have a level of depth of understanding beyond just what people are doing, but why they're doing it. I believe that you need both. We are moving into a world where everybody just wants quantitative data. That is a very, very slippery slope because if you do not understand why people are doing what they're doing, you're at high risk of messing up. The classic example I give to this is I remember I was working on what we call the wall in beauty, and it's the shelf. And someone was really excited because people were spending a very long time in the aisle. And the amount of time being spent quantitatively was ticking up. Well, qualitatively, what I understood was they're confused. So even though they're spending more time, like we've captured them longer in the aisle, they're leaving with nothing because they're confused. And if we only would have been measuring the quantitative metric of people are spending more time in the aisle, that could have been read as a positive, but we could have missed the understanding that there is no wayfinding. There is no, at that time, like color matching tools that are aiding people in finding their shade. People are struggling to be able to differentiate one product from another product. And so ultimately, what they leave with is nothing. So there was no win for the category, no win for the brand. All there was an uptick of confusion, which was manifested in a seemingly positive metric of women spending more time in the aisle. And so qualitative and quantitative, they complement each other. They are not opposites of each other. Too often we try to make them like they're opposing information sets. They are two sides of the same coin that help round out and fill out the story.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really good. And as you actually talk a little bit about that example, even that you gave with contouring, for example, and you said, hey, we're seeing that this is a trend and this is something that we might be able to leverage to have more product innovation. I mean, I think about so many new products that are coming out, like lip oils that you can say, oh, or I think like Euphoria, they have like an oil that you can use on your cheeks, you can use it on your lips, you can use it on your eyes, right? These kind of multi-use products. So, you know, that's, if you will, a potential consumer trend, right? That someone saw that said, hey, multi-use product is trending. And now we're going to leverage this to create a product that is intentionally, specifically for multi-use. So that, now that, you know, I think about what you said earlier, is an example of like a consumer research point.
Yes.
That lent itself to product innovation. Can you talk a little more about how research can, or consumer research specifically, can lend itself to brand equity or product innovation?
Yeah, so let's stick with product innovation right now because I love it. I'm going to spend like 2 seconds actually highlighting a couple of methodologies. So what you just described right there, what a lot of people don't realize is trend watching is consumer research. And the imperative word there is watching. It's observation. It's identifying behaviors and understanding, again, the qualitative part about why are they doing it? What are they doing? I remember I was working on a hair color brand and I discovered that the women were not using the entire box of hair color in their full head coloring. I was like, why? What are they doing? And what I found out was that after so many weeks, they would take the remainder of the product and they would only put it on their roots. Well, as you can imagine, that actually became the insight behind root touch-up products. And so when you begin to observe how consumers are actually using products in context, because you can use them in controlled environments, and there's a lot of value to that. Sending your products to consumers or having them come to a centralized location and asking them to use their products, there's a lot of value in that. Or you can send consumers your products or not send them your products and simply ask them to diary what they're doing and how they're doing it. We call this ethnographies, right? You can do this digitally, you can do them in person. And so by watching how they natively, organically use products, that gives you an opportunity to identify trends, movements, dynamic shifts in the marketplace that you can then come back in house and say, I see. And this is, I talk about several, I think it's like 6 or 7 C's of research and spaces I believe people should do research in. And one of them is the culture. And so when you are looking at the culture of your category, that's another C, and how consumers, that's another C, are using, may not be your products. And that's one of the things where you have to put your ego aside for a moment. It may not be your product that they're using, but how are they experiencing the category? What are they organically, natively, innately doing to satisfy the need or motivation or overcome a barrier that they have? And then how can you use that to ideate new products? So can you do something better? Can you do something different? Can you do something more economically than how competitors are doing something? But there is a lot of value in watching trends. There is a lot of value in understanding organic usage of the category and the culture. People are super creative. When you give them that credit, and this is another, I would say, humbling moment, I think sometimes for development teams or founders, where we have to be the genius. We have to be the one that made it up. When you give just human beings the credit for being creative and innovative and have a I'm going to make it work attitude, you'll be surprised what you see them doing with the inclusion of your product, and it could spark something. So I think that's one way, like we talk about how we can use product, leverage research to inspire product innovation, whether that be leveraging observations, it could be leveraging in context studies, ethnographies, looking at the culture, looking at the category. And then another side of that from a brand equity perspective, I love brand equity. And one of the things that I think is important to remember is that once you put your brand out to the world, you may own the product, but you don't own the brand. Your job, you now work for the brand, and your job is to protect the brand. Research gives you the ability to understand the mind space that your brand has out in the world. Because ultimately, if you want a share of their wallet, you must have a share of their mind. You need to understand how they think about you, when they think about you, what they think about you, and why they think about you. And equity is something that is built over time, and it can be shattered in an instant. Equity is also something that will save your behind when things go wrong. If you have good equity, it can save you when something goes off the rails. And a classic example, not even in the beauty space, that I like to use is BP oil. BP had the oil spill, and BP today remains one of the number one oil brands. Why? Because of the equity of the company. The value that BP has, the mind share that it has for its customers is that it's clean oil, it's safe oil, it's a reputable company. How they responded when it spilled, they got their crews out there. They aligned with one of the largest CPG companies in the world and say, hey, you have a product that's actually used for one thing, dish soap, but it is harmless against animals, the wildlife that's being affected by this oil spill. This was Dawn. They partnered with Dawn. This is how you saw all the commercials that had the little ducks that were so cute, that were being cleaned up by it, right? They understood our equity can save us and we have to act accordingly, right? And so research gives you the ability to know, where do I fit in people's minds? People still buy Toyota, even though Toyota had a recall on their tires. Want to know why? Because the equity, when you do an equity map of Toyota versus where they stand versus competition, Toyota is regarded as a safe car. And even though they had a safety issue, they have spent enough time building mind share and space and equity and the imagery that they carry through and the data that they do release around their safety, right? They use data to collect data to create impression. And so research is so important because you cannot assume the mind space that you have in the public's eyes. You will always see the positive. And it is not that you are waiting for the public to tell you the negative, but if there is a significant gap between what you as the business think and what the consumer thinks, your priority becomes, how do I close that gap? The other part of it too is that there is something you want to stand for. I know I keep giving all the ownership to the consumer, but there is identity that the brand wants to have. And so the question becomes, how well am I making that impression to my constituents? And only data will tell you that if I want to be known as prestige, if I want to be known for potency and highest quality, do my consumers think that, and what's my journey to building that equity and reputation with them?
That is so good. And as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about the early stage brands that, this conversation is here for, it's just really lending me to see that you really have to ask yourself, am I here for the long haul or am I here for a short bit?
Yes.
Because the things that you're talking about around research and equity and being a brand that has this overarching kind of story, right? A meaning, a value to the consumer. That's really like a long-term feeling, right?
Absolutely.
I'm reading a book that says what is a brand? A brand is really a feeling.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, when I walk down the aisle and I know I want to buy that, I get excited, or I know that it's going to work, or, oh, maybe it takes me back to when I first walked down the aisle with a parent or with a friend or whatever that story is. It's more than just a product.
Absolutely.
It really is, and that's what that made me think of.
Yeah, I'll say one thing on that. I do often tell brands that there are two stories happening. There is the story that the consumer already has going on, and there's an invitation for you to be a part of their story and add on to it. And so when we think about certain beauty brands, L'Oreal is the glamorous brand, right? Maybelline is the catwalk brand. CoverGirl is the girl next door brand. This is the history that they have. And it doesn't mean that there is an evolution of that, right? But there is something to be said for the mind space that they hold. And there is first impressions, and then there is consistent impressions. And emerging brands must think about their first impressions, and then how are they going to be consistent with those impressions? Because what consumers don't want is for a brand to leave them confused, right? Is that this week I thought that you were a clean brand, and then next week you got all the ingredients under the sun. I'm confused now, right? Like, which one are you? This week, you're telling me that beauty is simple, and then next week, you're telling me I need 25 products to create a look. So you have to decide, am I telling the simplicity story or am I telling this high fashion beauty junkie story, right? And get all these products. consumers want consistency. So for emerging brands, it's really important that you have to think about those early steps as first impressions, and that now your customers are looking to see, will you be consistent and cohesive around who you say you are? And that shows up in your products, that shows up in your messaging, that shows up on your website, that shows up on your in-person events and activities, should you have any of them, that shows up in your marketing and advertising. And then you release product number 2 and it starts all over again. It's cumulative in that sort of way. You're always building impression. The question now is it consistent? And do I like what you're telling me? That is what your consumers are judging.
That is so, so good. We moved around a little bit. We're talking about brand equity. I was going to ask about packaging, but with what you just said, I really want to ask the question of when research goes wrong. I might joke to a friend and say, I said a prayer and I thought that this was the answer. And it's like, well, who did you hear that from? You know what I mean? So can research lead you down the wrong path? And if so, do you have any watch outs regarding assessing consumer research so that when you get the research, you're making the right assumptions, almost like what you said with that quantitative and qualitative? We're watching these women shopping in the aisle and we're thinking, oh, they're spending time in the aisle. That means they're going to spend more money. But then you watch them long enough and you see, oh, they actually didn't walk out with anything. So can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of research leading you down the wrong path and how to catch it?
The first way that research can lead you down the wrong path is if you enter it with the wrong mindset. There is a difference between research and testing. And too often with research and with testing, you have to be okay that the answer may not turn out to be what you want it to be. Too often, you can have a bias going into the research. You are attempting to make the research say what you want it to say. That is a bias from the beginning, and it's a bias in the analysis. And so when you are not objective enough to say, I don't know, or I want, but it could be different, then you are already setting yourself up for your research to go wrong, because you are actually not listening or interpreting with clear eyes and with a clear mind and with open ears. You're hearing what you want to hear, right? And also why that's important is because if you're designing your own research, if you don't have an objective party that's supporting you in creating the research, there will be flaws in the design of it. So now I'm going to get a little technical. You will then start introducing what we call leading questions. You are leading the consumer to giving you the answer that you want, right? And again, it's because you went in to validate your answer as opposed to going in to objectively understand the consumer experience. So that's number one, is that from the mindset has to be right. The design has to be objective in its nature. And another place where it can go wrong is when I see a wrong audience. Did you recruit? And I use the term recruit loosely, but did you choose to talk to the right people? Let's just say that you decide to do a product usage study and you're going to send out 25 samples of your product. Have you been very selective around who you're sending those 25 products out to? Because do they represent the right target set? Let's just say that you are trying to grow market share. It's great and informative to send product to your current consumers. They are going to give you feedback based on their usage experience. And normally what they like about it. And that's important. You want to understand for the people who like it, why do they like it? Why do they use it? Why is it as effective as they believe that it is? But if you don't have a sample of non-users, if you don't have a sample of competitive users, and if you don't have a sample, let's say that you are what we used to call a POMI, right? A point of market entry product. If you don't have a set of target audience who doesn't use anything today, you are talking to the wrong people, right? And so you really have to define, who am I talking to and why am I talking to them? And then this part becomes very important. How do I screen for them? Research can go wrong by screening for the wrong people and talking to the wrong people, because what you may get out of it is information that is useless. It's not actionable for the thing that you're trying to do. If I am trying to sell into a beauty buyer and I'm telling that I am going to grow the category, eventually I have to translate that into dollars and cents. They're going to ask me, how am I doing that? Am I taking from a competitive user, or am I bringing new people into the category? And have I tested or sampled my product with individuals who represent this segment of the population of whom I believe I'm going to capture? So that's another place where research can go wrong, talking to the wrong people, screening for the wrong people. Another place it can go wrong is not asking the right questions. We get really caught up on Likert scales. We just tend to ask, do you like it? Likability, it lacks the depth that you need for true action. I would think of it as a starting point, but not the end all be all. If someone tells you, I hate this product, okay. And as hard as that feedback might be, the next thing you want to ask them is why. Why do you hate this product? What is it about it that doesn't work? If they tell you, I love this product, why? What is it about it that does work? One of the questions, and this is a freebie for anyone who's going to go out there and do their own research, I love to pair that question with, if you had your last $10, would you go and buy it? Because that gives you a sense of how much do they like it, right? Do I like it enough to buy it, and to buy it with my last $10 or whatever price point your product may be, right? And so there are degrees of understanding that can be missed when we have really, really rudimentary questions that we're asking. If we just stick with surface level things like, do you like it? You are missing the meat of what will enable you to refine, to sell. And so it's really important that you have depth and clarity of question. The other piece kind of tied to that from a design perspective is it's important to know why you're doing the research. Research is one of those things where everyone hears you should do it. And so they're like, okay, well, I'm going to go and do it. Do you know why? Why are you doing research? Are you doing research because I need to understand the population that's buying it? Am I doing research because I need to understand shopper habits? Am I doing research because I need to understand product efficacy? Am I doing research because I need to more deeply understand the category and the culture? It's important to define your destination of why you're doing your research, because without focus, you can be really, really broad, and that can hinder your ability to have very actionable data and research. Research is not standalone in the sense that I do my research, I've done it, I close the Excel spreadsheet and I can check it off. People treat it like a check mark in the process. No, it's really supposed to be informative to whatever your next is, whether your next is to create product, maybe your next is to create advertising, maybe your next is to start your sales process. Your data should be informing whatever is next in the to-do list. And so if you're just doing research for research's sake, that's called academia, and it's wonderful. There's a branch for that. If you are doing research for business sake, then it needs to be actionable, which means it needs to be tied to a next action item in your plan.
Great insights for brands to keep in mind. I wanted to ask you, I know you mentioned that you have 6 or 7 C's of consumer research.
Yes.
I'm wondering if, parting advice, but also can you share also at least your 6 or 7 C's before we end our conversation?
All right, here come the C's. First C is company. Do research on your own company, the company that you're creating, the product or brand that you're creating. What is your objective? What are your goals? Category. Your product does not live in isolation. It fits within a category. Do research on the category. Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Does it have heavy competition? Does it have a high barrier of entry? Is it crowded by legacy brands, et cetera, right? So you need to understand the category. Alongside that is the competition. Everybody has competition. I know everybody wants to feel like they are so singular, so different. No one does what they do. Everybody has competition. And the key with competition is that it could be direct competition. I have a press powder, you have a press powder, or it can be indirect competition in that I'm using a totally different product from a totally different category to compensate for a behavior. I'll use feminine hygiene as an example really quickly. It could be that I'm using a panty liner to keep freshness, or it could be that I'm using baby powder to maintain freshness and dryness, right? And so you want to think about that and understand that you can have direct competition and indirect competition. The other one is the consumer, obviously. And that is who's actually using this thing, right? Again, real people need to be using it. And sometimes the audience that is most captivated by your product may not be the audience that you originally thought it would be. Or it may enter into a secondary audience, a tertiary audience. So you want to do research on the consumer. What are their habits? What are their practices? What are their preferences? What are their barriers? What are their challenges? How do you delight them? What distracts them, etc. The next one is the customer. This one can trip people up sometimes. So when we hear consumer, everyone jumps to end user consumer, the person using the product. The customer could be the intermediary of whom you need to sell it to, right? So the person using my lip gloss is not Target, right? Like Target, I need to sell it into Target. They're my customer. They're the ones that need to buy it from me first. And I need to have a really good story that I'm telling Target in order to get them to buy it, right? And understanding that the needs of the customer can be quite different than the needs of the consumer. There is one more spin on that, which is also the shopper. I know that one's not a C, but I line these up together because they represent the value chain, if you will. But the shopper is really important. And again, your shopper may not be your end consumer. This is so critically important if we think for a moment around generations. If I am a mother, or if I am an older sister, or if I am an aunt, I might be purchasing on behalf of the end user, my daughter, my niece, my goddaughter, right? And so it needs to get past me first before it gets to her. So it's important to keep that in mind, and you want to understand shopper mindsets. Am I doing a routine purchase, or is this an impulse purchase? So things of that nature. But going back to my C's, second to last one kind of fits in that same realm, which is the channel. You need to understand a mass channel versus a club channel versus a e-commerce channel. They move differently. People have different mindsets and behaviors when it comes to those. And then lastly, I say the culture. And that culture goes back to that landscape in which your company, your category, your consumers, your competition, they all exist within a culture. And you need to get out of the bubble that is just you sometimes, or just your competition, and understand that there's a great big culture world inside of what it is that you are creating within. and be willing and eager and curious to learn about that culture. Because again, a lot of times that's where trends are defined. That's where major category shifts are defined. Things impact the culture. And so it's important to observe the culture, be in touch and in tune and constantly knowing what the culture is doing and how it's being shaped, who's influencing within the culture. Sometimes it's, people on the fringe, but then sometimes culture, once upon a time in beauty, the beauty culture used to be really defined by the professionals, be it the professional hairstylist, the professional makeup artist. And today we're living in a world where culture is being really defined by the everyday consumer. A lot of times the fringe, right? The underground person. So those are type of things that you want to watch from a culture perspective. So you've got company, category, competition, consumer, customer, channel, and culture. Do the research on the C's. Always have a pulse, always have an eye out when it comes to those things. And you'll have so much robust knowledge and understanding that you will be inspired to create and you will be enabled to make profit.
That is so good, Kristen. I mean, thank you so much. And I really do think that if most brands will look back at a brand that has done well, like I think of Fenty Beauty, right?
Yes.
Fenty Beauty obviously had so many of those things down, but the key catalyst that I think is likely present, I'm going to look back at brands that saw this huge success, was likely the combination of all these, and culture is at the forefront.
Yes.
Because we had just gotten to a moment in time where we were saying, hey, there's a lack of inclusion. Hey, like this is a problem. And then boom, here comes Riri with, 50 shades of foundation. And it was just like, this was what we needed. Now, she also still probably did all the other things, looking at the category and the competition and the consumer.
Yeah.
But like that cultural moment was what really allowed that to rise to the top at that time. So
yeah, it's the context by which it exists, right? And you want to capitalize upon that. And so the culture, it's really important, like right now, there is a whole, and you talked about this earlier, right? The multi-use products. Some years ago, having all the products was the thing, right? And so it's not that it was wrong to have all the products, it's just understanding a shift in the culture and that there are many subcultures that are happening within the big ecosystem of it all. And so you just have to figure out, where do I fit inside of the culture? Who do I take my cues from? And how do I create for that sliver of the culture? And understand that culture is people, but it's also things, it's movements, it's mindset. It all plays upon each other. People are thinking different about luxury and discretionary items like beauty in the middle of a recession. But there's a lot to be learned about beauty as a business in the culture and the backdrop of a recession. I've lived it. I've worked in it. It was actually the backdrop by which I won the David Ogilvy Award, was because we were in a recession. I understood CoverGirl needed to do something different. And so we had a whole campaign, Take Beauty Back, right? But we reframed the way that we thought about it, because that was the culture at the time, where people were pulling back because they were nervous and they didn't have the discretionary income. And it shifted the category because it introduced masstige, this idea that I didn't have to go to the department store and buy the $50 foundation, but here comes your CoverGirl and Olay product, which is premium for mass, but below prestige. And it totally gave this luxury feeling at affordability that at the time when luxuries were being pulled away, that women could still indulge in one way or another. Well, I think Revlon and L'Oreal made a huge splash in their lipsticks, because there was this theory called the lipstick index theory in recessions, that women will still pay for lipstick. It's the one luxury that they can afford, right? And so they revamped their color palette with these really rich and luxurious colors that women could put on even if they were going through a recession. So culture, it's big, it's dynamic, it's dynamic, it's dynamic. I don't know how many times I can say that because it's important. Culture is not static. And so be inspired by the culture, stay up on the culture and know that it's influencing and it's being influenced, and you have to figure out where you fit inside of it.
Oh, what a great note to end on. Thank you again to Kristen for joining me on the podcast episode today. I did not even realize that each of us has a little bit of consumer research in us, and it was so helpful to reframe how I look at consumer research so that we can now go out and know that all of the things that we do as we're building brands or learning from consumers, it's all research. Now it's just up to us to make sure we put those things together and make really good use of the information that we gather. As always, if you found this information helpful, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more people get visibility to the podcast, and share it with a friend or colleague. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.